Great. And then Tabitha also dropped a note catcher into the chat. So you can go ahead and open that up as you're waiting. Welcome, Leslie. Thanks for starting us off. Hi, Hillary. Nice to see you. Jennifer, Ray. Welcome. Great. So good to see everybody today. We're so happy that you're here with us. How many of you are, you can just show me with your hands, how many of you are actually on school break this week? Or all of you? Wow, so that's very impressive. So we're very happy to have you here, even on your break, that you're here and you're learning with us. So we really appreciate that. If your district doesn't have school break this week, well, you know, welcome, and maybe you'll just get out earlier than the other districts. So there's pros and cons, right? So we're so happy to have you. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat today. Just so you have a sense of who we are, we wanted to introduce ourselves and some of the facilitators you'll see here today. My name is Rhiannon, and I'm a senior manager here at TNTP. The other facilitator today is Margaret Bruce. Margaret, do you want to come off mute and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. My name is Margaret Bruce, and I'm a senior manager of academics here at TNTP, and I'm super grateful you could all make it today. So thank you for being here, and I'm really looking forward to doing this work alongside you.
Great, thanks, Margaret. You'll also see a few other TNTP staff members here today, and they will be supporting you, especially when we are in breakout rooms today, supporting your discussions that you have. So again, welcome. And we are going to go ahead and get started. This is our 5th session of the Drop-In School Leader PD series on learning acceleration. And today's focus is on accelerating learning in literacy through best instructional practices. Before we dive into our learning today, we're going to spend a few minutes just orienting ourselves to how we're going to spend our time together this afternoon. So as you may already know, DESE and TNTP partnered earlier this year on the creation of the acceleration roadmaps to provide guidance and recommendations to educators such as yourselves around these 3 overarching priorities for accelerating learning this school year. Today, our learning is going to highlight critical practices around the 3rd priority in particular, which is to ensure grade appropriate instruction with just-in-time scaffolds where they are needed. The emphasis today will specifically focus on the first part of this priority, which is ensuring instruction is truly grade appropriate. Before we dive in, we want to thank you all for making the time to be here, even on your vacation. We know it's not easy to step aside from your responsibilities or from your much deserved rest and relaxation to be fully present with us today. And we know it can be really tempting to sign on and just listen in, but we always remind our participants that we strive for high engagement during these sessions. Today, you're going to be asked to join breakout rooms to do some analysis and share your reflections and questions. So thank you for fully engaging with our learning community today. In addition to being present, we have a few additional values and shared norms that I'd like to embrace today. As you scan through these values, I'd love to take a moment to highlight teaching practice, not perfection, for today. We'll spend a lot of our time grappling and honing our vision for strong ELA instruction, and there may be some dissonance in that, so I encourage you to just embrace that experience and be open to others' thoughts. And finally, if you have a private question that comes up, feel free to shoot that question to Tabitha Hammond in the chat. We're all happy to answer your questions, but it's sometimes difficult to monitor the chat and facilitate at the same time. But Tabitha will be happy to answer any questions that come up. Okay, so with that, here are our objectives for today. Katie, would you mind reading our objectives for us?
Of course. Reflect on your vision for excellent ELA instruction and its connection to learning acceleration. Explore and practice with the classroom observation tool in ELA as a means to refine your vision for literacy. Consider how you can leverage your vision and the tool to build capacity and accelerate learning in ELA classrooms.
Great, thank you, Katie. And then if you will all take a minute to just type into the chat which one of these objectives you're most curious about today, 1, 2, or 3. Great, starting all over the board. I love that. Great, so I'm seeing a lot of 3s. I know as educators, we like to put things into action so that we're actually making moves. So I love that. It is important that we first start with our vision because that's going to drive everything that we do. Great, so just a quick note before we get started. We know that especially exploring and practicing with the classroom observation tool might feel very granular. We're going to review a tool and practice using it as a means to refine our vision for strong instruction in ELA. We're going to reflect on the tools that we already have within our schools that mirror the tool we have and think about how the two can supplement or better each other. And finally, we're going to think about how we can use skills and concepts within this PD today to build capacity within our schools. So the idea is not that you just take our tool and run with it, but to think about how it can just be a means to refine the great things that you're already doing in your schools already. So let's dive into the first objective. Before we start, I want to take a few minutes to reflect on our current visions for literacy. So think about walking into a classroom that exemplifies strong instruction in your mind. Think about teacher inputs and student outcomes. What is the teacher doing? What is the teacher saying? What are you seeing from students? And what are you hearing from students? We're going to take about 4 minutes here to formulate these ideas on a Jamboard. Make note of any additions from your colleagues that align to your vision and reflect on any additions that you didn't think about or any that surprise you. You'll find the link to the Jamboard in your note catcher. So as soon as you find that, open it up, and then you can start adding Post-its to kind of think about your vision for ELA in your mind. We'll take about 4 minutes here. And Tabitha just put a direct link to the Jamboard in the chat too, if that's easier for you. Great, I already see somebody started us off. That's great. We'll take about 1 more minute here. If you have finished adding your thoughts, read through what everybody else is saying and think about anything that resonates with you. Nice. I see somebody's adding check marks next to the ones that really resonate. Love that. Great. I'd love to invite anybody who feels inclined to come off mute and either share some trends that you're seeing or anything that particularly resonated with you as you read through the Jamboard.
I think for the part about what you're hearing from students, I saw a lot about students being able to discuss or debate or just being able to communicate ideas with their peers.
Thank you for starting us off, Marie. Absolutely. I also saw in what the teacher is saying, less teacher talk being something that somebody pulled out. I'd love for one more person to share anything that's resonating or any trends you're seeing.
I also saw a lot of student discussion and engagement, so partner work, but the students talking through what they understand or what they don't understand.
Yes, thank you. So definitely a trend here around student speech in the classroom, student voice in the classroom, for sure. Great. Let's see if I can share my screen again without, can everybody see it okay?
Looks
Yeah.
good.
Great, thanks. That was the first time. That's pretty good for me. Great, so thank you so much there. It's important to first reflect on a vision for strong instruction. And we're going to revisit the Jamboard at the end of the session to see if or how your vision evolved as you grapple with the research and the ELA instructional tool today. So let's take a minute to think about the work we are doing today, refining our vision for strong ELA instruction and how that connects to learning acceleration. I'd love for somebody to just give their initial thoughts on where you see that connection. How is the work we're doing today connected to learning acceleration, and in particular, this third pillar?
Well, I can speak to it. I've been thinking a lot about it. Even when you have student absences, so that idea of holding kids back until everybody has mastered the skill or is proficient at the skill, or when you hear lost learning, well, it's not really lost if they didn't have it to begin with. So instead of trying to fill in all the gaps we think they might have, really getting to know your students, where they're at, and then that idea of filling in that just in time, like they need this to be able to do this, they don't have it yet, here's how we're going to access it, or how we're going to scaffold it so they can get it. So we're not holding kids back. The mediation really ends up can hold an entire class back. And so that's the connection for me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sherry. Does anybody want to add on or are thinking something different about the connection to learning acceleration? Great. So, just to move us forward, as Sherry was saying, this is not kind of like rocket science, and there isn't this silver bullet here. Oftentimes there's a misconception that learning acceleration involves dramatically different inputs, or that there exists this silver bullet. The path to learning acceleration as an outcome actually just depends on great teaching. It seems simple enough, but as you know, great teaching is a very broad idea. So today is about refining our vision for strong instruction, but also to think about how we can build capacity in teachers to ensure learning acceleration is an outcome and that acceleration is actually happening and not this additional remediation, like Sherry was saying, that just continues to widen the gaps. So now that we've considered our initial vision for literacy and its connection to learning acceleration, I'm going to pass the mic to Margaret, who will guide us through the beginning of our second objective today.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon again, everyone. We're now going to pivot into our second objective, as Rhiannon stated, which is beginning to explore TNTP's classroom observation tool for ELA. And as Rhiannon said, we'll use the tool to build context, refine our vision for literacy, and to help build our own capacity within our schools, hopefully identifying a few next steps along the way as well. In the beginning of our time together, however, Rhiannon touched upon the fact that you and your school or your district may already have strong tools in place for ELA, and that's really great. And you may see our tool today and think, wow, that's also really great. I want to just use that tool or modify elements from it. We just want to be transparent that our goal for today is to hone your instructional lens through a shared experience, rather than dropping what you may have and modifying or adopting something new. And we hope that our exploration of the tool today and the discussions that we have, which have been great so far already, so I'm really excited, that the discussion that we have today and that you will begin to think about how to transfer the knowledge that you glean from our discussions and our tool to apply to the work that you are already doing. So to help us frame the use of this tool, let's review some of the research about where it came from. So TNTP developed the instructional walkthrough tool from our research findings within the opportunity myth, which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with if you're here today. We'll briefly discuss the findings so that you can better understand how the research directly correlates and supports the creation and utilization of this tool. Katie, I would love for you to please read the text in white for us. So what's the opportunity myth?
Sure. It's the false promise that if students do what they're asked in school, they'll be set up for success. When students don't get what they need out of school, the problem isn't usually that they tried and failed to do the work that would have prepared them for their goals. It's that they were never given a real chance to try.
Thank you so much, Katie. I can always count on you. So the bottom line that we found is that we ask students to aim really high, and they do. Specifically, we ask them to come to school every day, do the work that we assign, work diligently in school and at home, all with the promise that if they do these things, that they'll graduate high school, ready for college or career. And we promise that all students have the opportunities to succeed. Unfortunately, what we found, however, is that that promise right now is a myth. Opportunity in our school systems, in spite of often heroic efforts by millions of individual educators, is a scarce resource, and it's not distributed equitably. Students are indeed holding up their end of the bargain, but in most cases, we're not giving them a real chance to succeed. Our reviews in the opportunity myth of more than 2,700 classrooms from around the country in different school settings found that 2 and 3 classroom assignments were not rigorous enough to prepare for students for college and career. And 3 and 4 teachers weren't yet adapting the way they taught to meet high academic standards. We began to wonder how students were experiencing this, and so we decided to ask them as well. We hypothesized and found that 4 key components influence the outcomes that students achieve in the school year. These are the 4 resources which you can see here on the slide: grade level assignments, strong instruction, deep engagement, teachers with high expectations. Most students across the country, though, as we mentioned, don't get regular access to even one of these 4 resources yet. That's especially true for students of color, those from low income backgrounds and experiencing poverty, multilingual learners, and students with learning and thinking differences. Students who started the year behind, so there's some good news, and this will all connect to the tool as well. But students who started the year behind grew significantly more when they had access to grade appropriate assignments, strong instruction, deep engagement, and teachers with high expectations. So let's break the data down a little bit more here on this slide. So students that were deeply engaged grew 1 additional month in a single year. Students with teachers who believed that they could succeed grew about 8 more months in a single year. Students with more access to grade level assignments grew about 7 more months in a single year. And students who had access to strong instruction not only grew 6 additional months, but were over 30% more engaged. So there's an implicit narrative which this data disrupts, which is that we're sometimes told about our students who are behind, which is that they simply cannot do grade level work. It's not possible. But our extensive research, in fact, proved otherwise, and quite the opposite. We can also see learning acceleration embodied through the 4 resources as well, particularly here, grade level assignments and strong instruction. RPD today is driven by these 2 focal points. How are we leveraging grade appropriate assignments, which we know make significant impacts in the lives of our students, and strong instruction as well, to create deep engagement and high expectations in our classroom? The opportunity myth focused on instruction across content areas. These 4 key resources are transferable across all content areas as well. So let's define what grade appropriate assignments in strong instruction look like in ELA in particular. So narrowing down into ELA, we can see here, when we think about what grade appropriate assignments in strong instruction look like in ELA, we often start with Scarborough's rope, which you can see here on this slide. When we read a text, we're both attending to foundational or decoding competencies and meaning-based competencies. We're both decoding and comprehending the 2 different strands making up the rope that you see here. Oftentimes, word recognition strands are explicitly addressed in the younger grades. And as students become increasingly automatic in these foundational competencies, instruction becomes primarily focused on the language comprehension strands. When we think about Scarborough's rope in conjunction with the demands of the standards in Massachusetts ELA framework, we arrive at 4 essential practices in ELA. And here we can see these 4 essential practices that come along with the major shifts in ELA. These practices and the overarching findings from the opportunity myth are the foundation for the tool, which we'll be introducing and practicing with today through a couple of videos coming your way soon, and hopefully building capacity from today's session with. So this tool helps us define our strong instruction and literacy and keeps grade appropriate text and assignments at the forefront. We can see the connection of these 4 essential practices to the strands in Scarborough's rope as well, making it research-based. A focus on foundational skills attends to the word recognition strands. Practice with complex grade-appropriate text, building knowledge and vocabulary through that text, and grounding all responses and evidence from a text attend to the language comprehension strands and creates those strong learning experiences in ELA.
Great. And so if in the 4 essential practices in ELA, you likely notice the emphasis on a complex grade appropriate text. The foundation of strong literacy instruction is complex text, not standard specific skills. So if we look at the quote at the bottom of the slide that says, "The mistaken idea that reading is a skill, learn to crack the code, practice comprehension strategies, and you can read anything," may be the single biggest factor holding back reading achievement in the country, Dr. Daniel Willingham. It's important to highlight a few things here. One, we are talking about comprehension here. We know that there certainly is a code when we are talking about decoding, and that foundational skills must be taught in a systematic and sequential way. And 2, this idea might actually be a huge shift for many of you or for many of your teachers, especially those of you in districts that have not yet adopted high quality instructional materials, and we want to acknowledge that. The big idea here is that we are not in the name the steps skills mastery business of ELA anymore. We are in the business of helping kids make meaning and analyze texts that are actually worth thinking about and that they can learn from. The standards, guided by research, demand that we orient learning around a complex text and its meaning instead of a specific standard. Centering the text allows readers to build vocabulary, both through content and explicit study, grows broad knowledge of the world through reading, and allows for coherence and transferability across grades. This means that a lesson that centers on the text will integrate multiple reading, writing, speaking, and listening and/or language standards instead of just isolating one standard in a skill and drill approach. So the core idea here is that the text needs to be at the center of learning in an ELA classroom. We want to ask ourselves, are students spending most of their time reading, listening to, writing, and/or speaking about a high quality text that is appropriately complex for the grade? As we transition into exploring TNTP's classroom observation tool, you'll notice that access and time spent grappling with a complex text is at the heart of the tool. That text being present is crucial because it will inform the questions and tasks being asked of students and whether or not students are supporting their responses through textual evidence. All of these elements fall under the reading, listening, comprehension section tied to the meaning-based competencies in Scarborough's rope. So with that, we're going to actually dive into the tool. This tool, which we will explore in the next slide, is designed to help school leaders determine ELA strengths and growths based on these best practices. So TNTP's instructional walkthrough tool is organized into 3 sections to highlight the distinction between instruction focused on foundational skills or those meaning-based competencies and to capture culture of learning. At the top, you'll see culture of learning. As we explored in the opportunity myth discussion, student engagement is crucial to student success, which is measured through that strand. The reading foundational skills section addresses the word recognition strands of Scarborough's rope because phonics instruction should be systematic and explicit and not necessarily grounded in an authentic text. This section is more typically addressed in grades K through 2, where explicit phonics instruction is a norm. And just to note, we will not actually be exploring any videos that address this section today, but in your additional resources section of your note catcher, we did provide a video that explores this section if you want to look at that after the session today. The final section includes 3 rows that focus on the presence and use of complex text. So we're going to explore these 3 sections more deeply on the next slide. So we've been discussing the importance of having that grade appropriate text present in every lesson. You'll see that it's the essential question in the 3rd strand. When determining whether or not a text is grade appropriate, you have to think about both the quantitative and qualitative demands of the text. So when thinking about quantitative complexity, consider the Lexile level to situate that text in a grade band. To measure a text qualitatively, we use the qualitative complexity rubric from Achieve the Core to consider demands in meaning, structure, language, and knowledge. More details and links to these rubrics can be found in the ELA Observation Additional Guidance document, which is also linked in your note catcher today. But for now, we're just going to focus on the classroom observation tool, which is the 1-pager that is linked under the links for today's section in your tool. After we know that a complex text is at the heart of the lesson, we can think about the high quality questions and tasks. To achieve this, teachers will need to think carefully about the most important ideas in a text that students need to comprehend, and then strategically sequence their questions and tasks to build students toward that level of comprehension. The last piece we will want to consider before diving in is student ownership and what that means. Excellent teaching is an active endeavor. If teachers are doing the heavy lifting, will students learn? And many of you noted that in your Jamboard at the beginning of the session today, that student voice and student heavy lifting is crucial. So with that, we look for student ownership. There are 2 types of ownership teachers should seek. One is thinking ownership, which describes the depth and quality of thinking students are engaged in through the questioning. So think about Bloom's in this sense. We want to make sure that students are doing deep thinking and analysis. The second is participation ownership, which describes who participates and how often. Maximizing it means getting all students involved in speaking, responding to questions, thinking actively, processing ideas, and writing as often as possible. In your note catcher, we're finally going to dive in. You have a link to the ELA Instructional walkthrough tool that we used in the opportunity myth, and that is the tool that we're going to be practicing with today. This tool is in many ways a guide for us. So we're going to take 5 minutes to read through the content section of this tool independently. Take notes and write down questions on anything that jumps out to you and reflect back to what you shared in the opening Jamboard. What aligns or doesn't align to the initial vision that you shared? Is there anything that stands out? Are there any lingering questions that you have? We're also going to put these questions in the chat for you so that you have them when we ultimately go into breakout rooms. So just to synthesize what we're doing right now, we're going to take 5 minutes to independently read and think about these questions. We'll then go into breakout rooms to discuss with colleagues, and then we'll come back for a whole group share out. So 5 minutes independently right now, and then we'll send you into breakout rooms to discuss. Take about 30 more seconds to jot down your thoughts or reflect on them. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms to discuss these questions with our colleagues. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had great discussions. Let me see if I can share again. Probably going to do it wrong. Can you see my notes?
You're
You see
good now.
Good now?
Yep, looks
Okay.
good.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Great. So I'd love for just, 2 or 3 people to come off mute and share any reflections that they had with their colleagues, or to ask any questions that you had as you were going through the tool.
So I'll speak, I guess, for our group. So one of the things that we honed in on was about looking at student ownership and how students are engaged and using the tool that way. And also kind of flipping some of those indicators around for student self-assessment, like how do they feel if they were engaged and what the content is or was about. And then also using this tool as a way to interact with teachers or even principals in regards to what is being observed in the classroom and to improve professional practice. And then for me as a teacher, again, just being able to use this tool in the classroom, but also to as a way to check off kind of like how I'm selecting texts and making sure that they are robust enough, but also rigorous enough within the classroom for a diverse subset of students. In my school, we have a lot of ELLs. So we talked around that and what it means in the education system.
Great. Thank you so much. I don't want to say your name wrong. Is it Maisha? Is that right? I loved the point that you made too around how this can be a tool that's used to kind of push learning forward for teachers, that this is a great area, a way that you can kind of hone in into like, what's the next step in the classroom to achieve the vision, especially because it's designed to be sequential, right? You can't have high quality questions and tasks if that text is not there and present. So I love that you're already reflecting on how you can make sure that that text is present first and foremost. Would anybody else like to share their reflections that they had or ask any questions that came up?
Rhiannon, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but just I want to name that my group did have some really thoughtful questions. So if anyone wants to come to the mic, I would definitely encourage you to do so.
Sure, I totally forgot what I said now, Margaret. No, I was talking about a little bit about how in a lot of our classrooms we see a lot of the culture of learning aspects, and even the last one, I see a lot of teachers bringing the joy, not necessarily the kids reflecting it, but and there can still be often not a lot of rigor or critical thought but it's kind of difficult because you see all those elements in place. And then also just thinking about, it's rare that I get in for a whole lesson. So in about 10 or 15 minutes, I'm trying to really figure out what I can pull out, depending on where I'm at in the lesson. And again, that top one is kind of the easiest go-to. Yeah, sometimes it can be harder to see the others. So you just want to kind of assume or infer that that's coming. Right.
Definitely. And I mean, I don't want to undervalue culture of learning. There's a reason why it's first, right? You can't, it doesn't matter if you have the most rigorous lesson in the world if students are not engaged and they are not listening. So it comes first for a reason. You need to make sure that students are in a place where they are open to learning and feel supported, and that those structures are in place. But it is hard because that is often the easiest one to look at. I think that a lot of times what we look for first when we go into the classrooms beyond culture of learning is we look at the text that students are grappling with. And if students are not in a text within 10, 15 minutes that you're in a lesson, then you can probably assume that that level of rigor is not there yet because students aren't actually doing the lift and they're not doing the work of grappling with the text. I don't know if that answers your question or.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of times we keep hoping for the things to come that we haven't seen yet, but we have to just kind of say, all right, I've been in here for 15 minutes. And if kids haven't even cracked open a book, then that's probably where we need to start first, to make sure that kids are doing the work. Okay.
I think it was really helpful for us in some cases to name for teachers that when we go in there, their kind of mindset is that we need to see them working, right? And so kind of naming for them that we actually need to see the kids working. So it's okay for them to have these really long, uncomfortable pauses where they're pushing the kids to do the thinking instead of supplying the thinking to try to move on, so they get kind of nervous, like we're going to think they're not doing anything, but yeah, that's where the work really is happening too.
You make such a good point, Janet, because sometimes, teachers just need to be given permission to not have to fill the silence, right? Like, I think that it's very common when you're being observed to want to fill every second. And that's such a good point. So just explicitly naming for your teachers what your vision actually is and what you're looking for is really important. If any more questions come up or anything you're thinking about, please put them in the chat and somebody will be happy to answer them. And I'm sure that others would benefit from seeing them as well. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move us forward so that we can get into some video and practice using the tool. So I'm going to pass it over to Margaret to set us up for our first video.
Thanks, Rhiannon, and thank you for that thoughtful discussion. I think that there are many questions that there may be some revelations perhaps, or some insight is perhaps a more appropriate word when we take the tool into action with the video, because we won't be there for the whole class period as well, just a snippet. So I'm really excited because now we are going to have the opportunity to do a little practice with our tool and some videos. In order to set this up, we will actually share the screen for the video so we can all watch it in real time together. And we encourage you to take some notes in your note catcher. After we watch, we will go back into breakouts and have some discussions about our findings. We will do a poll and then we'll do the big reveal of TNTP's findings. As you can see on the slide here, we are going to first head into a 12th grade ELA classroom. And if you are from an elementary setting, please fear not, your turn will be coming up for a third video. So we're going to explore with this tool using examples from both secondary and elementary settings. Before we watch, just some quick framing. It's a great time to remind us that this tool is meant to build upon teachers' strengths. So consider the strengths that you see in this video, while also considering what evidence you are identifying to lift up certain elements within the tool itself, while of course trying to remain as objective as possible to collect evidence for each indicator. We also understand that this is most likely the first time that you are encountering this tool. So going back to Rhiannon's great framing of our norms for today, we're striving for that progress, not perfection. It's okay to just, play with this tool and practice with it, and we'll discuss a norm on it after the video. And last but not least, we want to name that this teacher, there are a lot of great things going on in this classroom. There are a lot of great things in this classroom. So as I said, pay attention to those great things, but also anchor yourself back to the tool, looking for those concrete components of evidence. And without further ado, Rhiannon, I think we are good to play that video.
Great. Let me see if I can do this right the first time. Let's see.
How can he do it? How can he get away with it? Yes.
Because he's like not afraid to say stupid things, so he can kind of say what's on everyone else's mind.
Absolutely. And then if he's
just to jump in,
as usual on. Good morning, scholars. Good morning, everyone. As usual on a Wednesday, we're going to start with our archetypal theory. Today's archetypal character is the fool. Our last two characters have been a little bit challenging. Remember that recently we took a look at the alter ego, which is fairly difficult. And we took a look at the Byronic hero, which is quite difficult, that rough around the edges kind of hero, very different than the standard hero. This is a figure that I think is a lot more recognizable. So as usual, take a moment to read over the description and turn to your neighbors and do some informal brainstorming about figures you think fit this model, both from literature and from pop culture.
Yeah.
Even though we like him last week, do you consider Jack Sparrow?
He's a little too intelligent, I think, maybe. He's more of a Byronic hero. This one needs to be a little goofier.
Like Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Forrest Gump is perfect. That's a perfect example. I never come back from that. Yeah.
Would Jafar's parrot be
The only thing about his parrot is that he's a little too clever. Yeah, he's more of a sidekick. You want a character that generates a little bit more kind of silly comic relief. Maybe so, yeah.
And the fool, like the hero or the villain's best friend?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes this character merges with the sidekick. Yeah, that happens quite often, actually. Anything good?
Yeah. We're trying to, I don't know if it's equate from
Maybe so. The thing about Moby Dick, though, is I don't know if there are really any uproariously funny, moments in that one. It's a little bit of a serious book.
You got that one? I got that one. Peter Pettigrew? From Harry Potter?
I say the twins.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Is the fool like also like a prankster? Does that have to be
Sometimes.
Does that have to be like a dumb character? 'Cause I feel like
It's like mostly the fool is a little bit substandard intelligence, but then he'll have often these moments of crazy epiphany, which is where the irony comes in. We perceive the fool to be lowly in stature and lowly in intelligence, but then he'll come out with some kind of gem. Yeah.
would Jim from Huck Finn be one?
I think the
'Cause he's,
Duke
like,
and the Dauphin are probably
okay.
the goofballs there. Yeah. Yeah. Jim is a Byronic hero / hero's best friend.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anything good?
I put Patrick.
Patrick's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. Grover. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one. Now that everyone has had a chance to do some brainstorming and speak with neighbors, as usual, we're going to discuss these characteristics together and come up with some examples from literature and pop culture. So, the fool. As I mentioned, this is a very common character as well. And what you look for here is you look for the fool to be an ironic form of comic relief. So what is comic relief? Someone give us an understanding of comic relief. Yes?
Like if it's a serious moment, it's that one person who just makes it, like eases the mood.
Absolutely. I like the way you said that, eases the mood. That's what you look for in comic relief. Therefore, we'll often find fools in what kinds of works of literature then, class? Drama or tragedy. Yep. You look for this figure to kind of shake things up, because if the mood gets too serious, it's hard for the audience to maintain focus. And we have a little bit of irony here. And here's essentially the irony that goes on. Although the fool is ridiculous And although the fool may not have the highest social standing or may not be the most intellectually gifted, the fool will sometimes come out with these little gems of wisdom. So the irony here is that although lowly, the fool is usually momentarily wise. The fool will have these little quick, wise moments, and we're going to talk about why. So again, his appearance or his station in life, his socioeconomic status, he may not be noble, okay? May be kind of lowly or ridiculous or silly. But this often reminds us of how arbitrary class snobbery can be. What is arbitrary? Random, unfair, not based on fact. Because a lot of times when people in certain social classes, the higher ones, when they consider themselves better than everyone else, that class snobbery is shattered by the fool, because here's the fool in a lower class or who gets less respect, and he'll see something about the upper class that really exposes their ridiculousness or their folly. So he's a commentator. He comments upon the powerful people, the wealthy people in society, and he gets away with it. How can the fool get away with making these kinds of comments? How can he do it? How can he get away with it? Yes.
Because he's like not afraid to say stupid things, so he can kind of say what's on everyone else's mind.
Absolutely. And then if he says something that does kind of hit close to home, everybody says, oh, well, he's always saying ridiculous things like that. It makes it safe, right?
Thank you so much for taking the time to journey into the 12th grade classroom with us. We are now going to head into breakouts where you can discuss your findings for each indicator with the other participants here in the room. Welcome back, and thank you all for sharing your thinking in those breakout rooms. We are now going to take a poll to see where the collective landed in terms of our responses. So go ahead, you should have a poll that's popped up in Zoom. Please share how you scored each indicator, and then we'll do our big reveal. So take 30 seconds to submit your vote now.
No pressure here. This is anonymous, so just take whatever you're thinking.
Such a great point, Rhiannon. Thank you. Okay, we are looking for just 4 more folks to participate. We want to make sure that your voices are heard. And then we will reveal really interesting findings so far. Okay, so we can see the results here on the slide in terms of where folks landed. So for culture of learning, high quality texts, really interesting, high quality questions and tasks, and student ownership, a split there. So what we'll do here is I will transition us to reviewing TNTP's results, and then we can answer any questions or discuss further if needed. And so for culture of learning, TNTP identified that yes, students are participating, volunteering, asking questions, and appear engaged in the lesson. strong relationships between the teacher and the student appear evident in the way that the teacher is engaging with them and the back and forth conversations and the participation more generally. So we were a yes there. In terms of reading foundations, this is a 12th grade lesson, so that is not applicable. For high quality text, we are with the 93% of you all that also said not yet. There is no text present in this lesson. So you may have been looking for a text or hearing some references to text, but in fact, there is zero text used in this lesson. So while students reference characters from popular movies and books, they do not read or refer to any specific text. And while students did mention some text in their discussion, the entirety of the lesson was spent outside of this text. And so, as Rhiannon mentioned earlier, this tool is designed to be hierarchical, meaning that we'll start with the culture of learning because everything else will flow from there. And then we'll get into whether or not there is a grade appropriate complex text present. Similarly, if there's not a text present, it will be very difficult to have high quality questions and tasks because there's no text from which to draw. So here is also a not yet. Students are merely asked to identify characters who fit the archetype of the fool, but because there's no text evidence, they're not able to provide any evidence, text evidence, or use evidence in their writing. And so this indicator is also a not yet. And finally, for student ownership, just looking back to the poll, we were at a 53% of you said not yet. We agree with the 53% of you out there. So there's not much challenging about discussing a common character type outside of a specific text. The teacher does at times probe, but not enough to lift this to a higher rating as well. So this activity is based on student background knowledge of previously read or viewed works, which is unfortunately an inequitable practice. When we make a complex grade appropriate text the center of our practice, it thus creates equity for our students because they are all drawing upon the same experience, which is that of the text itself. After our big reveal here, any questions or aha moments or yes affirmations coming up for you?
I think our group is pretty in line with those results where felt like the culture of learning was quite strong, but then once it came to I guess, it's obvious that there was no text, but for the ownership and the questioning, that she, it would have had so many great opportunities to have a peer respond and say, what do you think? Do you think that character would be a fool? Or keeping her notes up as students were thinking about it so they can connect to those key points that she was going to share later. Or letting students respond and giving questioning around the idea of a fool rather than just like the sage on the stage talking about the concept. She, had some students who responded when she was going over the notes, but she really could have easily engaged the whole class or had students talking partners about the information they learned. And she just used a lot of her voice time, unfortunately.
Marie, I am so grateful that you shared a bit of your brilliance here with us because it's a great point bringing us back to the idea that this tool is designed to build on a teacher's strengths. Every teacher is going to have a strength, right? So we don't want to knock teachers down at all by using this. This teacher has so many strengths happening. And can we just imagine for a second if in this classroom, we can go back there mentally and we can put a complex grade appropriate text in front of every student and we have the culture of learning that's present there. Can we imagine how the rigor would then skyrocket, right? So it's designed to give us those right research-based standards aligned next steps that can really change outcomes for students. So Marie, thank you so much for lifting that up. Love that sage on a stage. Want to avoid being that myself. So without further ado, unless we have other questions or thoughts from those findings. Marie, thanks for just jumping off mute and popping in.
I guess I have a question. So yes, kids were engaged or looked like they were engaged. But my issue is they're learning from this teacher that they can basically just kind of share a little bit and then the teacher does the rest of the work for them. So I'm not sure about the culture of learning personally.
That's an excellent point, Teresa, and thank you for lifting that up. I think that's very valid. I think that we would see more of that in the student ownership indicator of the rubric, where the teacher is quickly affirming or clarifying student responses. But you're right, it may impact some of the engagement in the lesson as well. Generally, when we go into classrooms and use this tool, we'll be looking to see, are students participating, generally following instructions, generally participating, right? And then when we think about who's doing the heavy lifting, that's where we would really look for those types of responses and back and forth. Is that helpful?
No, my group agrees with you. I still am going to push back. No, seriously, I'm going to push back and say that we talk about high expectations, and is this teacher actually setting these kids up to do less work because she's constantly there giving them answers? I don't know. Her voice is so, is so much a part of what's happening in that classroom. I wonder about the classroom that she's creating, I guess.
I think it's a valid question for certain, and that rigor is a key component to engagement as well. And that's what we found in the opportunity myth. So I'm really grateful that you raised that up. And when you use this tool, right, that's part of the design of the tool, is that you can take it and bring it to a PLC, or bring it to a grade team meeting, bring it to a staff meeting, bring it to a PD within your school and say, let's go through each indicator, right? Let's talk about how do we make this come to life? And these are the types of ways that we can build capacity based on the tool and based on our unique students and staff as well.
All right, I'm just going to jump in super quick. Sorry, my video is off today, but hey, Teresa, everything you're saying is accurate. It's just not rateable under culture of learning. We want to avoid what I call double dinging. So although what you're saying is true, it's not necessarily applicable in that section. And if I understand you correctly, I think it might be more applicable in high quality questions and tasks, because she's doing some of the thinking for students. So I think it falls under there. But what you're saying is correct. It's just not quite in that area of the tool, if that makes sense.
I think that if she made some adjustments, she has that culture there that would follow her, you know, even if she started with seating so that it was more collaborative, and then asked herself, like, what I'm about to say, is that going to model for kids what I want to see in them, or am I just answering and, you know, the question for them? You know, like, I think a few subtle changes and she would have like some really good inroads there.
I guess the word respect is missing in the cultural learning for me, so that it doesn't feel respectful that she doesn't think kids can do this work. So I may be reading more into it. I just sort of have a problem with it, but I'm learning to use the tool. So I will give her credit for creating this culture that you all see.
Thank you, Teresa. It's a complex tool, and I really appreciate you sharing your opinion and bringing that forward, even if it feels, you know, different than perhaps what was discussed in your breakout room. And having that brave space is really important for our professional collaboration here. You'll also notice that this tool is not a checkbox, right? There aren't rankings and scores that you can achieve. It's designed for those conversations and capacity building in the best interest of students. And I think that's what you're also helping us to have here. We're going to head into another classroom now, which will perhaps provide even more insight. I'm just checking the chat. Thank you, Rhiannon. Any other TNT peers or folks need to jump in there? Please interrupt me as always, not a problem. But this second video will serve, we believe, to showcase a different element of the tool as well. So we've practiced once with the tool, and now we're going to hop into a 10th grade classroom and consider the differences in this setting and perhaps similarities that you might find. Again, we'll share our screen and we encourage you to jot your notes in your note catcher. After our video, we'll head back into breakouts. We'll recap just as we did the first time. We'll take our poll and then, aha, the big reveal. So without further ado, I think we're ready, and thank you, Rhiannon, for that screen share.
Through Obama's 2009 inaugural address, what messages are communicated to the people of America?
I was asking the students to analyze the cumulative effect of President Obama's 2009 inaugural address and analyze the form and the content. By form, I mean the literary and rhetorical devices that were used.
Not only did he want to address what he wanted to fix, he also showed in lines 52 and 57, well, through 52 and 57, all of the goals that he wanted to complete during his term.
And then like on words that he uses a lot of, he used the word we a lot, speaking as if we were all together and gonna work together to help it. Like in all lines, like even in line 28, he says we, 59. I'm just pointing out random ones, but it's effective.
I engage the students in a lot of public speaking activities that prepare them to be comfortable.
On this day is repeated both times, which is an example of anaphora, because it really it emphasizes what the point he's trying to get across.
I introduce to them how do you engage in a conversation with your peers, not interrupting each other and being respectful of others' opinions, respectfully disagreeing.
Obama, he alludes to historical events, on lines 146 to 149. He's sort of emphasizing the hope and strength in times of difficulty. And yeah, he also references presidents and quotes presidents to make himself appear more convincing to his listeners.
Thematically, the speech fits into a general essential question for the year. How does the past inform our current decisions and our actions?
He alluded to the Battle of Valley Forge during the Revolutionary War. And this was a time of violence and despair. Thousands of people were dying. There was almost no possibility that they were going to succeed in this war. And Washington's words of hope are basically what got them through it. And Obama is saying if they can overcome a struggle like this, we can overcome this economic struggle. So the winter of hardship that he's talking about is symbolizing the economic crisis that they were facing at the time, I think.
The way that I have my Socratic seminar structured, they are responsible for analyzing the text and picking out elements and devices, so rhetorical devices and literary elements, and speaking with each other and trying to uncover and discover the purpose of the text that we're discussing, rather than my directly instructing them on what I think the meaning of the text is.
A major rhetorical device that Obama makes use of is the tricolon. So he does it a number of times. For example, in line 17, homes have been lost, jobs shed, businesses shuttered. That's a tricolon.
I found another example of a tricolon, line 23. He speaks about the challenges that America is facing, saying that they are real, they are serious, and they are many.
I incorporated text-based answers. During the discussion, students were referencing particular lines in order to provide answers to their questions or to answer each other's questions. And so you saw a direct reference to text. When thinking about the preparation for high-performing students, for this group of students in particular, I picked a speech that forced them to closely read rhetoric and to pick out and pick apart the use of rhetorical devices. And so this really forces them to do some high-level critical thinking on their own without my guidance as their teacher.
There are a lot of rhetorical devices and literary devices found in this speech, an amazing amount. But not only do you see them in this speech, but you could also connect it to Langston Hughes' poem, Let America Be America Again. And I think they contrast greatly, they're basically opposite people. And ironically, they're both talking about the same people. They're talking about the hardworking people. The difference is Obama shaped his words with optimism while Langston spoke negatively about them. Obama's saying that we need to renew America's dream. So he's saying that we had the dream, but we just need to get it back. And Langston's saying we need to redeem the dream. He thinks that we never had the dream, but we still need to reach it. I agree with Alex partially in that Hughes is negative, but towards the end, he becomes more like Obama, his tone. In the beginning, his tone is pessimistic and angry about America. He really didn't like how it didn't fulfill its American dream. But in the last stanza, he says, there's enough hope. we can have the hope for America to be better again.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Take the final moments here to finish capturing your notes and evidence, and then you'll receive that invite for breakout to share with your colleagues. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for your discussions. My group, Rhiannon, we can see your notes just so you know, and thank you for sharing your screen. But my group, we finally ended without being interrupted or cut off, so that was really exciting for us. Thank you all, though, for your conversations. We're now going to open up the poll again to once again get those collective responses to see where we all landed. So go ahead and check into that pop-up and submit your rankings for each indicator, please. We'll take about 30 seconds or so. Thank you all so much for the 88% of us who submitted your thinking. Again, just want to make sure your voice is heard. But we will now reveal our findings as well. So for culture of learning, we agreed with 67% of you here that yes, students participate, volunteer, ask questions, and are focused on the work of the lesson. Again, for reading foundations, we'll see that in the next video. For high quality text, yes, we are with 93% of you who also scored this yes. Obama's inaugural address has a lexile of 1,000 to 1,100 range, which places it on the lower part of the 9 to 10 grade band, but the text is layered with meaning, builds relevant content knowledge, and is worthy of close reading and attention. And so we are at a yes here. High quality questions in tasks. We are with 80% of you also with a yes. The tasks and questions ensure students attend closely to the text and use text evidence to demonstrate their understanding of the text's most important ideas and meanings, again, aligned with the shifts called for by the standards in ELA. And for student ownership, we were with 60% of you with a yes, that students are explaining their thinking and asking questions of each other to deepen their understanding and use text evidence to provide precise responses to challenging questions. You'll see certain students on the outer edge of the circle and students on the inner edge of the circle. Students on the outer edge are not participating verbally in this round by design within the Socratic seminar style, but they are taking notes and the style will call for them to shift roles in the next conversation. So what are the key differences that you noticed between this video and the 12th grade example? And I think that we're a small enough group that we can pop off mute to share.
The amount of teacher talk.
Thanks, Jennifer. Say more about that.
Well, in the first video that we saw, the teacher was doing a lot of the talking as we discussed, a lot of the thinking for the students. In this video, I think that other than the background information that she gave to us about the assignment, we really didn't hear her part of the conversation as part of the conversation in that lesson. It was strictly in the Socratic seminar way run by the students.
Thank you, Jen. And it sounds like a very exciting bird sanctuary type environment back there.
I have two very noisy birds. I'm sorry. That's
no,
why.
Please don't apologize. I'm just teasing. I appreciate you coming off mute and sharing your thinking with us as well. I want to just see if there's any other TNT peers who want to lift up any specific elements or invite folks to the mic at this time.
I do want to mention an observation made by Anita, where when students were specifically citing from the text, you could hear ruffling of paper throughout the room, really showing that the students were actually verifying or even seeing what was being lifted or a counter argument to what the argument was being made. So one of two possibilities, but Anita did a great job really sharing that in the room, and we were able to discuss it for a second.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Anita, for sharing that. Christine, I saw a thumbs up from you, and that resonates with what you shared in the chat. Was there anything else you'd like to layer in there? As we can see, and as many of us noted, the most notable departure here is that there's a complex grade appropriate text at the heart of the lesson that then students are drawing upon for evidence, both orally and in writing, which is really going to be a transformative shift that will make large scale gains for students in every ELA classroom. But now I'm really excited to transition into foundational skills to take a look at how this tool can support lower grades as well.
Great, thank you, Margaret. So now that we've considered what strong instruction looks like in 2 high school settings, we're going to hop into a first grade classroom and consider how the tool transfers across grade levels. Again, I'm going to share my screen. You can jot notes in whatever way makes sense to you. And after the video, we'll head into breakouts with our colleagues to discuss our thoughts. So with that, let me share the video.
Planning for that 50-50 shift of fiction and nonfiction literature can be challenging because it's sometimes difficult to find nonfiction text that's accessible at a first grade level. So we've really worked hard this year with our librarian and with other resources in the school to find things that have that really rich nonfiction text.
Would we say that this is a fiction piece or a nonfiction piece? Gabrielle, what do you think?
Nonfiction.
Nonfiction. What clues are there in that text that would let you know that it's a nonfiction article?
There's real things about hamsters.
So when you say real things, what do you mean by that?
Like real facts.
Real facts. So different than the Reader's Theater play that we read about Flake the Missing Hamster.
Yeah.
Yes. Things that tell us more about the hamster and how it lives and what it eats and things like that.
I was reminding the students of a lot of previously taught skills like headings, glossaries, highlighting, using your evidence pointing finger to find specific things in the text.
Everyone, what is the name of that first heading?
Body.
Body. Now, would I expect to look under that heading body and find information about what a hamster eats?
No.
No, what might I expect to find in there? What do you think, Jonathan?
About its body.
Like what? Like what about its body?
How it moves.
Maybe how it moves. Maybe what it's covered in, right? So today I want you to keep that in mind. Use those headings when you talk with your partners in your group and when you come back to share your evidence, okay? All right. Now, another great text feature that we've been practicing that you're going to have the opportunity to use is called what?
Glossary.
The glossary. Okay, now, raise your hand if you can tell us why we might use a glossary. If I'm reading about the hamster's body and I see a word under that heading that's printed in bold, that's a signal to me. Ding, 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 ding. This might be a word that I'm not sure of the meaning of. So I should look it up in the glossary. Where will it be? It's going to be in the back. Peek in your text. Let's see if you can find it. When you think you have it, put your finger on your nose.
Planning for that 50-50 shift over the course of the year has been as with most things at the primary level, a very scaffolded type of approach where a lot of it at the beginning of the year was whole class and modeling. And as the year has progressed, I've kind of pulled back and pulled back and pulled back a little bit at a time so that now they're at a point where they're readers, they're thinkers, they're really facile with moving through packets of text and diagrams. So they're at the point really of application where they're using all of these things that have been modeled and shown and practiced in different ways.
Would a pet hamster like to share a cage with other hamsters? No. No. But where would we find that though? Right here. Most hamsters like to live alone. Okay. Yes, most hamsters like to live alone. Good.
Sometimes when we read nonfiction texts, we can hear and read things that might be a little bit different than some of the things we read in fiction texts. Do you remember we read that book about the two hamsters that were watching the class?
Yeah.
And they wanted to go out and make their hamster. No, those hamsters lived together in the same cage. But group, what did the text tell us about how they like to live? Hamsters actually like to live alone. I think the planning of all of this has really evolved. It's not a quick fix, one and done. Oh, I did text features. Oh, I did nonfiction. It's a constant thing, a thread that runs all through the year to get them to this point.
Okay, so take a second to finish up your notes, and then we're going to head back into breakout rooms to discuss this first grade classroom. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to do the same thing again, and I'll launch the poll for first grade. Again, you can kind of just put wherever you're thinking, either where you originally were, or maybe the conversation in your group kind of swayed you in a different direction. Great. Just waiting on a few more. Okay, and so now you should be able to see the poll results. We are a little bit more mixed on this one, so it'll be interesting to see that big reveal. Okay, great. So here's the big reveal. These are the ratings that we landed on. I'm going to go through each section just like before and explain rationale. So for culture of learning, we were with 69% of you and said a yes here. What I will say is for all of these sections, with the exception of high quality text, excuse me, it's really nuanced. What is a yes versus a mostly versus a somewhat? And so it's important to mention that there's additional guidance in the additional guidance document that's in your note catcher. So if you are not sure which way to go, there's some thoughts there, but it's not a perfect science. So it's important to mention that. We were at a yes. Students seem authentically engaged. They participate, volunteer, ask questions, and are focused on the work of the lesson. Students engage in discussion with one another as well during collaborative work time and are on task doing that. In addition, there were clearly routines set up to get students into that collaborative work time, even with highlighters and looking for evidence and things like that. For high quality text, we usually look for students to grapple with an authentic text. This text was pulled from a supplemental curriculum from Capstone called Pebble Go, which appears to be highly rated. It serves as a content hub for students in grades K through 3 and provides supplemental nonfiction articles. The Lexile level for this text is between 410 and 600, which is appropriate for first grade, particularly when students were asked to read the text independently. For high quality questions and tasks, we were at a mostly here, which I believe is where most of you were. Yes, most of you were at a mostly. Multiple standards were integrated, including speaking and listening standards. Students were asked questions that attended to the knowledge demands in the text. For example, would a pet hamster like to share a cage with other hamsters? And structure, what would you expect to find under that heading? Finding evidence was clearly a habit in this classroom. Questions, though, were not necessarily sequenced to build a cohesive understanding of the text. For example, some of the questions seemed random. For example, what's the first heading? So would I look under that heading and see things about what the hamster eats? No. What might I expect to find? There was a lot of kind of guiding rather than having students identify the heading, explain the purpose, which would meet the full demands of the standard. For student ownership, we were at a somewhat here. Those students were asked to read the text, discuss and respond to questions with a partner. There were a few times that the teacher rounded up the answer for students or kind of led the students to the answer, like in the previous example. For example, when asking the group to share what they learned about how hamsters live, she says sometimes when we read nonfiction, we might read things that might be different than what we read in fiction. And then she went on to explain those differences and then just had students choral respond to fill in the missing word rather than have them do that analysis themselves. So with all of that, are there any lingering questions after hearing that rationale? There is a question in the chat that was sent to me around using Lexile level over other benchmark assessment levels. That's just what we use at TNTP. Of course, if your district or school uses something different than that, you certainly could look at that as well. That's where, you know, you have to take the tool and adapt it for the needs of your district and your school. Okay. So with that, I want to thank you for that rigorous discussion today. We're going to pause here and take a step back and kind of think about our key takeaways from the session today. I want to go back to our initial vision for literacy here, and I want to go back to the Jamboard. So if you go to open up the Jamboard and move to the second slide in the Jamboard, and Tabitha, if you could put that really helpful post-it that you put last time, I want to kind of just synthesize what we're taking away today and how this experience is making you think about your observational practices and what you're going to assess in the future. So we'll just take a couple minutes here to put our thoughts into the Jamboard. So again, just adding in those Post-its, thinking about what you're taking away and how this experience is making you think about your observational practices. Great, so I'm seeing some great reflections here, already thinking about how you can take what you learned today and think about how to build capacity in teachers and bring this into your schools. I'm seeing some people resonating as well. We want to thank you so much. We're almost at time for engaging with us today. In the chat, you'll see a link to our survey. We would love if you could take that survey. We really kind of pour over the survey results and aim to make these sessions as high impact as possible for you. So that is linked in the chat. We are happy to stay on and ask any questions that you have in the meantime.